So this is an episode that I've wanted to make for a while now. In fact, I had made notes about everything I'm going to talk about today, and then I lost them. So I had to do it all over again, but that's okay. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and really should be near and dear to the heart of anybody that grew up with an NES, in my opinion. And that's talking about Konami's games on the system. I feel like Konami and Capcom are like the Bill Pullman and the Bill Paxton of NES developers, because some people, and myself included, you can get confused about like who developed what, and there's that sort of that game about like you name a movie and someone has to say, oh, was that Bill Paxton or Bill Pullman? Anyway, that's kind of stupid, but I've talked about my history with the NES before. I got my NES in 1987. So, pretty early on, I think before a lot of kids got an NES. I think 87, 88 is really when everyone started getting the system. And really, I think that Konami was probably the most important third-party developer early on in the NES lifespan. To me, it seems more like, early days was more, when Konami was bringing the heat. And then Capcom released a lot of great games later on. Not to say they didn't have some good games early on, but when you think of like really early Capcom games like Ghosts and Goblins, they didn't even develop that game themselves. They, of course, developed the arcade game, but then they hired Micronics to program the NES conversion, so it's really not very good. Whereas later with Capcom, you got like the Mega Man games and the Disney licensed games and other arcade conversions like Gunsmoke, for example. There's many awesome Capcom games. That's a topic for another day. But when I think about a lot of the real heavy hitter Konami games, they came out a lot earlier, as you're going to see. And I was my main period of time when I was really into the NES was, probably 1990 and before, because, then I got a computer and I started playing a lot of other stuff, but which again is a topic for another day. So for me, like when I see, a Konami NES game with like that iconic, silver label, silver box art motif, I get a flood of nostalgia from that. Just because for me, there's just so many Konami games that stand out for me. So today we're going to talk about 14 Konami games. This is not an exhaustive list of all the Konami games on the NES. I think it's all 14 Konami games that I have. But there's going to be games that I don't talk about. And so, if that's a game that's like a favorite of yours, then you should talk about it, down in the comments section. And maybe there's a reason I don't have it, and maybe I just missed that one or something. But these are the 14 Konami games that I have, and that either I have fond memories of playing back then, or that I'm just happy to have now. So being that this is 14 games, I think we should just get started. Oh, these are in what I believe to be the chronological order of release. So the first one, this was actually one of the very first third-party games to appear on the NES, and that is, if it's going to focus, maybe, is Gradius. Maybe it's not going to focus. I don't know. Gradius came out in December of 1986. I believe the arcade game came out in 1985. It kind of blows my mind that this is such an early release on the platform, because for my money, this is maybe the best shooter that ever came out on the NES. If not, it's got to be like top 3. There's another Konami shooter that has to be in that conversation as well. This game is also noteworthy for being the first Konami game to use the Konami code, the up, up, down, down, blah, blah, blah code. I definitely remember playing this game as a kid. I don't remember where or why. It may have been at a friend's house, or I may have rented it, but this is a game that I still play to this day. I have Gradius on the PC Engine, as some of you know, and to me that's the definitive version of Gradius, but if I'm being honest, this might be my favorite version of Gradius. So how about that? Next, great memories of this one. This was a common game for people to have. Like, I'd go over to some kid's house and they'd have this. And I do remember renting it. And that is Track and Field. I just don't think it's going to focus on these games. Whenever I think of Track and Field, I always think of the NES Advantage. Because to me, this game is the most fun. This is going to sound lame, but it's just the truth. This game to me is the most fun when you use a controller with the turbo button and you cheat. I don't know why. I always get a huge kick out of it. Setting like ridiculous world records in like the 100-meter dash or the hurdles or whatever. There are, of course... this is, I guess I should explain for anybody who doesn't know, this is like something like 8 or 10, maybe it's 8 mini games. They're all like Olympic events. And interestingly, this was originally a Konami, see, I already did it, Konami arcade game that was called, I have a note here, Hyper Olympic. That's what it was called in Japan. I think it did come out here as Track and Field. And it only had, I don't know, maybe something like 4 events. It didn't have 8, I don't believe. The original Japanese version. And then that got converted to the Famicom. And then there was another game called, I have it written down here, Hyper Sports. And then that also got converted to the Famicom. And then they put them together so that you got all, I think I said, I think it's 8 events. They put them all together and released it in the West as Track and Field. This is kind of an example of where, people were kind of getting around, or I guess I would just say that copyright issues were a lot more loose, at least when it comes to video games, because this the title screen music of this game is that Chariots of Fire music. Anybody that's old enough to remember the '84 Olympics, no, I mean, that was like on the, I don't know if it was the number 1 on the Billboard charts, but it was way up there. Was it Vangelis, I think, was who performed it? But anyway, that's on here, and they didn't license that. It was a different time. But anyway, so some of the mini games on here are, like I said, 100-meter dash or maybe 100-yard dash, hurdles, long jump. Is there a triple jump? I don't remember. Javelin throw. And like those are all things where you have to run. And so normally the way you do it is by like hammering the button real fast. But if you have a turbo controller, you hold it down. And I love using the NES Advantage because it has the little dials on it, so you can make the turbo faster or slower. And I just think it's funny. But then there's events on here, like there's archery, and I think there's skeet shooting, or maybe it calls it clay pigeon. I don't remember, where you don't do like the hammering of the button, and so the turbo controller doesn't help you at all. And those events are still fun. I think this is a lot of fun. There's a sequel to this. There's a Track and Field 2, but I don't know. I've played it, and like I like the original one better. But with the original one, there's nostalgia involved, and with Track and Field 2, like I didn't even know that existed. I don't think when I was a kid. Oh, I was gonna say, I wanted to talk about video game prices for a second, because I think that has to kind of come into play with this game. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Like even thinking about modern day Nintendo consoles, like the Switch is what we have now. It doesn't seem like first party games don't really ever drop in price. Like if you want to go buy like Breath of the Wild or something now, it's still going to cost you like $50 or $60. And the same was really true on the NES. Like the first party, if you wanted like Zelda or something like that, or a Super Mario game, you were going to be lucky to find it discounted, because those games the price would stay the same. But the same was not true of third party games. And so this game came out in April of '87, and I'm sure that by '88, if you walked into a store, you could probably get Track and Field for like $20. And so I think that's part of the reason that Konami games in my childhood were more ubiquitous, is they were just more affordable if you didn't buy them right away, especially games like this. Some of the more heavy hitter titles would hold their price longer, I guess. But anyway, Track and Field, I don't know. I think it's an awesome game. Oh, this is also a 5-screw version. Is it gonna? I just don't think it's gonna focus on this camera. This doesn't have the little tabs in the front because it has 5 screws in the back. Oh yeah, see, I have little cheat notes taped to the back. There's 14 games. I can't remember everything. Next, I don't have a whole lot to say about this game, to be honest. I wanted to include it just because this is another example of a game where I just feel like I used to see it all the time as a kid. You'd go over to somebody's house, and there was a pretty good chance that they were going to have a copy of Russian Attack. And I feel like the most famous thing about Russian Attack is the name, because it's very punny. Of course, when this game came out in April of '87, we were still living in the Cold War conditions or whatever. And, this is Russian RUSH''N attack, like I'm going to rush and attack. But really, it's Russian Attack, like Attack of the Russians. And so that's something that the game is really known for. In Japan, this game is called Green Beret, which really, if you play the game, that seems like a more apt title, because you're like the special forces guy who drops behind enemy lines in the Soviet Union, and when you start off, all you have is a knife. You have to pick up guns that other people drop. It's just a side-scrolling action game. It's really nothing special. It's just that like I said, I used to see it a lot as a kid, and so I have some nostalgia for it. And I think when I bought this game, I think I got this game for like literally a few dollars, because nobody cares about Russian Attack. Next, we have what I would call the next heavy hitter, because I consider Gradius definitely to be a heavy hitter. But in the early days of the NES, like in '87, there might have been no third-party hitter heavier than the first Castlevania. And I talked about Castlevania already on an episode of Flashback. My first memory and main memory of Castlevania as a kid was borrowing it for a weekend from another kid at school. And at that time, that would have been sometime this game came out in May of '87, but it would have been sometime in like the first half of '88 was the first time I played this game. And, by that time I'd had my NES for less than a year, and I'm not really sure how many other games, like just side-scrolling action games that weren't Super Mario Brothers, I had even played. And to have a game like this with the Dracula theme and sort of that fantasy, I guess you could call it horror. I never really found the game to be like scary or anything. I just thought it had, sort of that spooky atmosphere. But this is a game I remember putting this game in and playing it for so long that like it got dark outside and I didn't have any lights on in the room, and it really added to the ambiance. And I don't know. I still I love this game to this day. I mean, I think I would have to say, we'll talk about that later, I guess. But I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about it. Even it's just the first Castlevania is just it's a great game. Some people don't like. It's got very stiff mechanics. Like once you jump, you can't like adjust your jump once you're in midair like you can with something like a Mario game or with a lot of side-scrolling action games. But really, that makes it more realistic, right? But yeah, and this is one of my absolute favorite NES games. And in fact, I was thinking about this before I started making this video. If I was going to make like a top 25 list of my favorite NES games, there'd be a lot of Konami games on that list, which is probably part of the reason that I wanted to make this video in the first place. Next, we have our second sports game. And this is not a game that I ever had, or I don't know if I even really ever played this that much as a kid, Double Dribble. When I think of Double Dribble, I think of my best friend's brother. So my best friend in like elementary school and junior high was a kid named Jonathan, and his brother Jordan was 4 years older than we were, and he wasn't really so much into video games as much as he was into sports. And so he really enjoyed sports video games. And my memories of him are playing Double Dribble or Bases Loaded or Hoops. Maybe Tecmo Bowl, I'm not sure. But he used to play a lot. He was mainly a basketball guy. And he used to play a ton of Double Dribble. And, by the way, this came out in September of 1987. So, see, we're still... in the very early days, we're still only in '87, and look how many awesome games have come out for the NES from Konami. It's interesting to me that this game came out so early, and yet you could make the argument that it's the best basketball game on the NES. And, I'd have to really think about like how long it took for a game on any home console to come out that was better than Double Dribble. Like maybe the early offerings from EA on the Genesis, Lakers versus Celtics, or even Lakers versus Celtics really wasn't that good of a game. Before that, there was Pat Riley Basketball, which was really not that good of a game. Not that this is some kind of great game. It seems like it took a while for somebody to come out with a good basketball game. But I don't know this. But this is a good game. It's got the slam dunk animations. People who watch the show know how important I think slam dunk animations are, and this has those. But I still enjoy playing this game now. Sometimes, I mean, my favorite basketball game is NBA Live '95 on the Genesis or the Super Nintendo. You can take your pick. They're both very similar. But back in the NES days, you couldn't go wrong with Double Dribble. See, we've done 5 already. That's pretty good. Here's another one I don't have a whole lot to say about, but this game was a pretty big deal, I feel like, as a kid, just because the movie was such a big deal. And that is Top Gun, which you can barely see because we've talked about this before. This is one of these games that came out of Tengen's library. So at some point, this game used to live at like Tengen headquarters over in somewhere in the Bay Area. It's a 408 area code, so there you go. This came out in November of '87, which, month after Double Dribble. And, I've talked before about, licensed games that come out significantly after the movie and how sometimes that seems a little bit weird, or games that came out that were based on a TV show that was quite a bit older and like, well, what's that all about? But with Top Gun, the movie came out in, I think, May of '86, but it got released on VHS tape in March of '87. And from what I've read online, I don't remember as far, I wasn't an adult, and a consumer at that time, but it was one of the first like blockbuster VHS releases where it was like heavily promoted ahead of time. And I'm not sure if it was the kind of movie that got released only to rental stores first or not, but it was a very popular home rental or home purchase. And so, for that reason, and the fact that the movie was just a huge deal, it was still very much relevant in 1987. And so for the game to come out then made a lot of sense. As far as the game itself goes, it plays similarly to like Afterburner, but not as fun. But the thing everybody remembers about Top Gun is trying to land on the aircraft carrier, which just seemed very unforgiving. Like if you play it, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard. Like it tells you, pull up, speed up, slow down, you got to go left, you got to go right. And it feels like you can do all that correctly and still crash. Just in general, I just think the game's not a whole lot of fun. But when I was growing up, a good friend of mine, Stuart, he had this game. And he was kind of like me, where he had an NES, but only had a handful of games. And one of the games that he had was Top Gun. And so we'd play it just, because he had it, not because we thought that it was particularly good or anything. All right, game number 7. This is another movie licensed game. This is a game that Jonathan, my best friend, had, and I used to watch him play it. I don't think this is a game that I ever borrowed from him or anything. It's a game I used to kind of watch him play it with sort of this bewilderment, where it's like, well, this doesn't really seem like it has a whole lot to do with the movie. And I also had a hard time understanding, what are you supposed to be doing exactly? And that's Goonies II. And when I was a kid, I thought it was called Goonies II. Is this supposed to be the sequel to the movie somehow or something? But it's because in Japan, there was a Goonies 1 on the Famicom that we didn't get here. We just got Goonies 2. So I don't know why they didn't just call it Goonies. I'm sure there's an explanation for that, and I just don't know it. This came out in November of 1987. It's just a weird, it's a side-scrolling action game, but then it's got these sections where you'll go through a door, and then it has more of this pseudo 3D perspective that kind of almost reminds me of Shadowgate. And you're doing random stuff like hitting the walls either with your fist or with a hammer. to try to find like hidden passages. I just don't know. Like, I'm sure if I sat down and played the game, maybe with a guide or something, then I would get it. I'm not saying this is a bad game. And in fact, when this game came out, it was pretty well received by critics. I'm just saying that for me, I've never tried that hard to play the game. And like I said, just my memories of watching Jonathan play it are more like, this game seems kind of weird. But, and this is also an example, kind of what I was talking about a minute ago with Top Gun. The movie Goonies came out in the summer of '85. So I guess it, kind of would have been competing with Top Gun. No, that was '86, right? So it was the year before. So summer of '85. So it was 2 years later that this came out on the NES. But to be honest, like, I remember as a kid, Goonies was like a pretty big deal. I don't remember if I saw it in the theater or not, but I definitely saw it on home video. And that was a popular enough movie amongst us kids that, probably this was going to be a no-brainer purchase or rental for most kids. So, yeah. All right. Here we go. Here's one of the heaviest of the heavy from Konami, coming out in February of 1988. It's too bad it missed the 1987 holiday season, is Contra. And I remember, I've told this story on Flashback, but, there was some kid that I made friends with at school where I would go to his house after school because it was like on the way to my house. Like, I walked to school and back, and not particularly far or anything, but I had to walk past like this condominium complex, and like his dad lived in that condo complex. And I think he like lived with his dad during the week and his mom on the weekends or something. That really is neither here nor there, but I used to go over to his house with him after, like, we would meet up after school and go to his house, and we would play Contra. And I remember that was how I learned about this whole chip shortage thing, because I remember him telling me how hard it was to get Contra, and that his dad had found it in LA because his dad had some kind of job where he traveled for work, and he's like, yeah, my dad was down in LA on business and he found this down there, and he mentioned that it was like really expensive, so maybe he got it at like an independent game shop where they were like juicing the customers or something. But it's got to be the first NES game that I ever played 2-player co-op, so that was fun. This was my introduction to the Konami code. I don't think I knew back then that you could... To me, it wasn't the Konami code, it was the Contra code. It never even occurred to me to try popping that code into another Konami game. So, I mean, for sure, I never used it playing Gradius. But, and he already knew the code. He's like, oh, yeah, do this and we'll get... So we would fire up the game and we would each have 30 lives and we would play the game together co-op. It wasn't until fairly recently that I learned that there's some significant differences between the American version and the Japanese version. And I think it was because I found a translation on like a ROM pack on my EverDrive or something, and I'm playing it and I was like, whoa, this is like way different. It's still the same game, like as far as the levels go, but there's more animation. Like in the first level, it's like the jungle level, right? And so you're just going by and you're on these cliffs and there's like these palm trees in the background. And in the American version, the palm trees are just static. But in the Japanese version, they're like waving back and forth, which looks really cool. The Japanese version also has cutscenes, which kind of helps with the plot. I don't really care about the plot, but the cutscenes look kind of cool. And the reason for that, and I didn't know this either, this was a real learning opportunity for me, is that in Japan, Nintendo allowed third-party developers to manufacture their own cartridges. And I think that's part of the reason that you see Famicom cartridges will look different. Like the shape might be slightly different. A lot of times the colors are different. I have Salamander for the Famicom, and the cartridge shell is translucent, which is pretty cool. But one of the benefits of the developers being able to manufacture their own cartridges is that they could also design their own chips. And so they used a special Konami. They developed a special mapper chip called, I have it written back here, the VRC2. And that's how they were able to do things like have the animation. But outside of Japan, Nintendo had a rule where they had to manufacture everybody's cartridges. And so they were not willing to use, like if you made a custom chip, they're like, yeah, we're not using that. And so the American version, because it lacks that VRC2 chip, we can't have like the cool animation and stuff, which is too bad. Oh, other thing, everybody probably knows this, but in Europe, this game is called Probotector, and the two playable characters are robots instead of humans, because somehow this game was too violent the way it is to be released in Europe. And I went over there for vacation many years ago, and I remember I thought it would be cool to get a copy of Probotector, and I found one in a game store, and it was really, really expensive, so I left that alone. But yeah, I don't know. This was like a top 25. This has got to be anybody's top 25 game. It's Contra, right? It's a shame it wasn't on the NES Mini. I'm sure it's because of licensing issues. Next, I was just talking about this, is it's not really a sequel. Is it a sequel? I don't know. To Gradius. It's Life Force, a.k.a. Salamander. Like I said, I have Salamander for the Famicom and for the PC Engine. And something that I just learned, thanks to a viewer sending me an email, I mentioned that one of the things I liked better about Life Force on the NES versus Salamander on the PC Engine is that the power-up system for Life Force is the same as it is for Gradius. Like, you pick up power-up tokens that you can sort of spend on whatever power-up is, lit up at the bottom of the screen. Like, every time you pick up a token, it advances it over one on the bottom of the screen. So it can be like, double shot, missile, laser, shields, etc. I think I'm missing speed up. And but I said that in the arcades, Salamander didn't use that kind of power-up system, but that on the NES, they made it like Gradius. And so this viewer emailed me and said, actually, there were different versions of the game in the arcade. They had the version in the arcade that seemingly Konami considers to be the definitive version, because if you play, like there was a Gradius collection that was released on the PlayStation and Saturn in Japan that has like the version of Salamander where it just drops power-ups and you don't have the token system. But apparently there's a version of the game, maybe it's just the American version, where it has the same power-up system as this and as Gradius. So it's not that this game is just copying the power-up system of Gradius. It's just there were versions of the arcade system that used the Gradius-style power-up system. So that was interesting to learn. I think I forgot to say Contra, February of 88. No, I think I said that. February of 88. Life Force, August of 88. So the middle of summer, I suppose. I remember my main memory of this is I did rent this game sometime in... probably not right when it came out, probably more like 1989 sometime. And I just remember, and I think I've mentioned this before, but for a while I had this TV in my room that was a pretty big TV. It was like, that's a 20-inch. I feel like it was bigger than that, maybe 21 inches. I'm not really sure. Couldn't have been like 25. That would be huge. But remember, this is back in the late 80s where like a lot of people, a 20-inch or somewhere between 20 and 25 inches might be the TV that you had in your living room. And I had one of those in my room that somebody gave my mom for free. And the reason for that was where I grew up, all of our TV stations were UHF stations. So like above the teens. I think our dial started on like 16 or 17, I don't remember, and went up to like 60 or something like that. But in most major metropolitan areas, most of the networks were on VHF, so between channels 2 and 13. Well, where we lived, we didn't have any VHF channels. And in this TV, I think the UHF tuner was like dead somehow. So you couldn't tune in anything as far as TV stations in my area, but VHF worked fine, which just means that I could plug my NES into the TV with the RF adapter and, turn it to channel 3 and it worked just fine. So you could basically use it as like a monitor. I don't remember if it had AV inputs for like a VCR, but I didn't have a VCR anyway in my room, so it didn't really matter. But I don't remember what happened to that TV. I feel like I didn't have it that long. Maybe it broke the rest of the way. I don't really know. But I just remember sitting on the floor because I had it on some kind of low piece of furniture in my room, so I'd have to kind of sit on the floor to get eye level with it. And I just remember playing Life Force on it. And like I just remember, like the second half of the first level where you're sort of shooting through that living wall. I just remember thinking that it looked like raw hamburger meat, which is kind of still what I think. But yeah, anyway, I love this game. This would also be a top 25. And that's what I was going to say about, is Gradius or Life Force the best shooter on the NES? I don't know, but it's definitely, in my opinion, one of the two. This one's kind of cool because it flip-flops between when it starts out, it's horizontally scrolling, then the next level's vertically scrolling, the next level's horizontally scrolling. That's kind of cool. This game also has, like, all the bosses are different, whereas in Gradius, it's like the same boss at the end of every level, which seems kind of weird, but it's an early game. Next, I'm going to drink some water. Next, this is a game I didn't play at all when I was a kid. I have this game now because a viewer named Tommy sent it to me. In one of the early episodes of Flashback, I talked about my memories of playing Super Mario Brothers with my dad, and that, my dad is no longer with us. And, it's funny because I didn't think much of the story. I was just telling, this is how it was when I grew up. And, that really kind of struck a chord with a lot of people who have, similar things, great memories with their fathers. They no longer have their father around. And so Tommy sent me this game along with a very nice letter and said that, my memory was playing Super Mario Brothers with my dad, and his memory was playing Jackal with his dad, which would be a lot cooler, actually, because Jackal is 2-player co-op. So, I would play Super Mario Brothers with my dad, and I would play as Mario and he would play as Luigi. But, if we'd had a game like this, we could have actually played it together. And Jackal's a really cool game. Oh, by the way, September 1988, Jackal came out. So Jackal is like an overhead run and gun game, like an Akari Warriors, Shock Troopers type game, except it's not a run and gun, it's like a drive and gun. You're driving like a Jeep, like a stereotypical military, like Willys Jeep. And so the screen doesn't always scroll up and down. Sometimes you're going across, but there's enemies coming at you that you have to kill. But what you're really the main reason that you're doing any of this is that you're trying to rescue POWs. So kind of like Choplifter. So you'll go shoot. There'll be like a hut or something, and you'll shoot it, and that blows the front door open, and then all these hostages or POWs, same thing, right? Will come running out, and they'll hop in your Jeep. And so the cool thing about playing this game 2-player is you could kind of strategize a little bit. Okay, well, I'll take care of shooting the huts and getting the hostages, and you just run interference against the enemies coming onto the screen. So that's pretty cool. And what else do I have to say? Maybe nothing. I don't know. It's just a very cool game. And it's funny. I got this far into talking about Konami. We didn't talk about Konami music, which is crazy. One of the things Konami games are known for is awesome soundtracks. Castlevania has an amazing soundtrack that it's known for. Gradius has a cool soundtrack. Life Force, obviously Contra has an amazing soundtrack. Jackal also, awesome soundtrack. Another arcade, I didn't really mention which ones are arcade conversions. Most of them are arcade conversions. So if you're Konami, why wouldn't you do that? Anyway, just a cool game. If you're ever, for some reason you got a buddy comes over, you want to play something 2-player co-op, check out Jackal. One time I had a friend come over who's much, much younger than me, he's in his 20s. I think I've told the story before. I feel bad telling it because it doesn't make doesn't paint him in a good light. He's a very, very nice guy. It was just a generational difference. He came over, wanted to play some 2-player co-op, and we started playing Contra, and we couldn't even play it for that long because he got so frustrated that it's like he wanted to just throw the controller down. And like he was visibly, you could see it in his face, like he was ready. He was frustrated because he's just a younger guy, and he's used to games that sort of, I don't want to say coddle you. That's got a negative connotation, but games that are just not so difficult, right? Like we grew up with games where it's like the game was just punishingly hard, and that was part of the replay value of, NES games. If they were easy, you'd plow through it in 30 minutes, and then, okay, that's $50 down the drain. So getting good at the game was kind of the value you got out of the game. But anyway, if you were looking for a 2-player co-op game that maybe wasn't so punishingly difficult, Jackal. And like I said, I think the strategization, is that a word? Aspect of it also would make it a really cool 2-player game. Next, so I've been thinking about this game lately because, I feel like I have this memory. I talked about the friend who I would go over to his house after school and play Contra. And I swear up and down that I played Blades of Steel at his house also. And I'm not saying that's not possible, but I lived in that house from like January of '88 until right before school started at the end of summer. And then my dad stayed in that house. I moved out of town to go move back in with my mom. Now, I did go back and visit him all the time. And so it's possible that I went over to this kid's house when I was in town visiting, because Blades of Steel didn't come out until December of '88, by which time I was gone. I left in like August of '88. So I must have gone and visited him, I guess, in like sometime in '89 or something. Either that or I never played the game at his house at all, in which case, where did I play it? I don't recall. Like I said, I think I played it at his house, maybe when I was visiting. But it's kind of like a false memory. And, a lot of times people will watch my show and I'll talk about like what game, was a launch game and what games weren't launch games. And people want to kind of argue. And it's because they swear the same way I swear up and down that I played Blades of Steel at this kid's house. They'll swear up and down like, no, I got a Genesis or whatever at launch. It was my birthday present, and I got it with Alex Kidd. And it's just like, sorry, that wasn't even close to a launch game. But the more you think about a memory that you have, I think the more cemented it gets as being a fact in your head. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people, including me with Blades of Steel. Is it the best hockey game on the NES? I talked about this on Twitter like last week or something. You've got Blades of Steel people and you've got ice hockey people. Ice hockey people love the fact that you can kind of make your team with the skinny guy, the medium guy, and the fat guy, whereas Blades of Steel doesn't give you that. Blades of Steel has fighting, which I don't think ice hockey has. I think it plays a little bit better. Blades of Steel has speech in it, but it doesn't really sound that great. The thing you hear most often is "get the pass," but like when I was a kid, we couldn't understand that it said "get the pass." If you were not lucky enough, but this is not a game I ever ran across in the arcade. It is an arcade game, and if you ever played the game in the arcade, the speech is much more clear, and then you can clearly hear, oh, it's "get the pass." We weren't sure what it said. What else would it say? Like "face off" or "fight" or just "ah." Like I think if you got like really mugged for the puck and you ended up on the ice, or you did the same thing to the other guy, it would just go "ah." But in that way, it was real deadpan. I don't know, but we all thought it was cool anyway. But yeah, anyway, December of '88, I probably played it sometime in '89. All right. So this next game, I talked about this game on a read-through at some point, and I think this is one of the most unfairly maligned games on the NES, and that is Castlevania II, Simon's Quest. Just making sure I didn't say the wrong thing. Simon's Quest. And look, I can only guess. I don't watch Angry Video Game Nerd. I've never seen an episode of Angry Video Game Nerd. I am aware of the format of the show, and my understanding is that at some point he did a video about Castlevania II. You know, I guess sitting in front of the TV screaming at it. I don't, nothing against the guy. He's very successful, and I actually like James Rolfe's. Is it Rolfe? I like his videos where he's just doing a movie review or something, and he's not in that character. I just personally, maybe I'm a little bit too old. Angry Video Game Nerd just doesn't jive with me personally. But I think, unfortunately, I just think that there are people out there who don't understand that that's a character, and that, of course, he's angry when he's playing games. That's the point of the show. You shouldn't necessarily take his opinions on games at face value. And so I think a lot of people run around sort of parroting the idea that Castlevania II sucks because, he made a video screaming about how much it sucks. And the main knock that people have on this game is like, oh, well, you can't beat it without a guide. Well, I can think of tons of NES games that I don't think you could reasonably beat without a guide. The awesomeness of The Legend of Zelda is like unimpeachable. But the idea that you're going to really be able to beat that, of course, someone's going to chime in now and be like, oh, I beat it without a guide. Well, good for you. But the idea that somebody's going to sit around randomly bombing things and burning bushes to try to beat the game, I think is a little bit unrealistic. And there are certain parts of the game where, you needed a guide, or you had to go talk to a friend like I did who had already beat the game because they had a guide. And the same thing is true here. And it reminds me of games like Zelda or Zelda 2, where it's not like the game's not giving you clues. It's just not telling you straight up, hey, go over there and burn the fourth bush in. It tries to give you clues, and really you should be playing games like this with a piece of paper and a pencil. And when somebody gives you a clue, you should write it down. Because I really think there are only like one or two things in this game where I don't think you could reasonably figure that out on your own. But again, games like Shadowgate, how are you going to figure out to take the sphere and stick it on the staff? And I don't know. I just think you play the game with a guide. That's kind of how it is. I think this game is a lot of fun. I like the fact that it has more of the adventure aspect and almost an open world aspect versus just having the discrete levels in it. I think it has some of the best music in the entire... I think Bloody Tears, in my opinion, is the greatest Castlevania track, or song in the entire franchise. Some people don't like the graphical style because Simon has sort of a black outline, maybe more like what you'd almost like cell shaded kind of looking, and I mean some of the color palette choices, I agree. It's like, the Simon sprite looks a little bit boring, I guess, but personally I don't really care. Like the fact that it switches between day and night, I think is like a really cool aspect of the gameplay. All I'm saying is, if you've never played this game, you should not just decide that you're not going to play it because some other people say that it's crappy, because some other people don't know what they're talking about. Other people might legitimately say, no, I've played this game, I don't think it's good, and that's fair play. But a lot of people, like I said, they just kind of run around repeating things they hear other people say, and you shouldn't really listen to those people. A buddy of mine who hangs out in the CGQ Discord, Josh, he goes by the online handle KreativeAssasin. He wrote a really good guide to beating this game, and also kind of makes a defense for why he thinks that this game is unfairly maligned. And I agree with him wholeheartedly. And I'll try to remember to put a link to that article on his website in the description so you could check it out. But if you've never played Simon's Quest, I strongly recommend that you check it out. December of 88, by the way, which is interesting because Christmas of 88 had a lot of sequels to beloved NES games that a lot of people like to sort of trash, or at least went through periods of time where people trashed them. Super Mario Brothers 2, Legend of Zelda 2, and Castlevania II. And I think all three of those games are great. We've only got 2 games left, and they're both sequels. The first one, so I don't understand, and this is just my experience growing up. Other people will have different experiences, but for me, Contra was such a huge deal, but I didn't know anybody who had Super C. I don't remember anybody talking about Super C, and to me it's interesting because, I think if you take nostalgia out of the equation, I think Super C is better than Contra, although, that's trying to compare like very delicious apples to other very delicious, apples. It's just like, well, do you like Fuji or Honeycrisp or something like that? They're both awesome games, but I just feel like, how come everybody's always going on and on about Contra and people don't give a lot of love to Super C? If you like Contra, it's more Contra. But like one of the things I was never that into with Contra was the fortress levels. Like they're okay, like the pseudo third-person perspective, I don't know, they're just kind of like, I don't like them that much. So this game doesn't have those. Instead, it has like levels that are almost more like a run-and-gun game, like Akari Warriors or something. And I think that's really cool. April of 1990, by the way. And that's all I wrote back here was the fortress levels. Because to me, it's like, wow, that's really cool, the fortress levels. But like other than that, like a lot of the sprites are the same and the sound effects are the same and a lot of the weapons are the same. It's just like, if you like Contra, like, dude, it's more Contra. So, if you're going to malign games like Castlevania II for being too different, then here you go. Like, here's more of the same in the best way possible. And then the last game we have here, I don't know, is this the best game Konami ever made on the NES? I don't know. You could probably at least make the argument. Is Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse. And this came out in September of 1990. And the only thing I would say about this game that's a shame is this goes back again to Nintendo not allowing third-party developers to make their own cartridges. Although in this case, it doesn't matter as much, I guess. This game had, what was it, the VRC6? Yeah, VRC6 chip, which was another mapper, but it also, that chip gave 3 more sound channels to however many sound channels the NES already has. I don't remember off the top of my head. The VRC6 offered 3 more sound channels. Of course, here in the US, the NES hardware didn't allow for audio to come off the cartridge, so it doesn't really matter anyway. But because this game in Japan was programmed for the VRC6 chip, Konami had to basically port this game. Maybe port's not the right word, but it had to work with a chip that Nintendo made, like a mapper chip, which I wrote it on here, the MMC5. So it's just interesting again because like this stuff, I don't know if I just didn't know or it didn't occur to me that, companies like Konami that were designing their own chips couldn't use them outside of Japan. The things that are so this game kind of goes back to the original Castlevania as far as not having the same kind of adventure style aspect of play that Castlevania II has. Like, Castlevania II, you buy items from vendors, you get experience points, you level up. This game goes back to the original style of Castlevania where you have discrete levels. You don't have experience points and stuff like that. Like in Castlevania 2, the hearts are your currency that you use to buy stuff from people, and it's also your experience points. So you don't deplete hearts by using special weapons. Once you buy a special weapon, you can use it as much as you want. Whereas in like pretty much any other Castlevania game, at least from the early days, the hearts were sort of like your currency as far as how many times you could use your special weapon. So in that way, this is, more similar to the original Castlevania. But this game adds like branching paths. So like you'll get to the end of a level, and then sometimes not even the end of a level, and you'll get to a screen where it's like, well, you can go straight or you can go down a staircase and go a different way, and it'll take you to different parts of the game. So like you can play the game and beat it, but you didn't get to see everything because of the path you took. And so then you can go play the game again and take a different path and beat the game and see different stuff. But this game also has unlockable characters in it, which became something that you could do, in games like Rondo of Blood and some of the later Castlevania, like the Symphony of the Night and stuff like that, where there were other playable characters. This was, I think, the game that started that, unless it was like the what was Castlevania Chronicles called in Japan? I forgot. I don't know if that one. I'm just saying I don't know if that one let you do it or not. I don't want to make the statement that this game started the whole idea of unlockable characters, because I don't know if that's true or not. But it was the first NES game that let you do that. And so like once you would beat a boss, and then that would unlock this character, and it was like, oh, well, do you want, this character to come with you? And it was like Alucard, Sypha. I think Sypha is how you pronounce it, and I forgot. It's funny because the third guy has like the most boring of the three names. His name's like Gary, or it's not Gary, but it's like something like that, Chuck or something. I just can't remember his name. He's the guy that like, he has a knife and he like stabs people, almost like he's shivving somebody in the shower in prison or something, like, I just can't remember his name. But you can only take one character with you. And so if you get to the point where you unlock, I don't remember which character is first. I think Sypha? I think Sypha's first. If you take Sypha with you, then I think that's the only character you can have. Like, you can't unlock any more. And so that's another way that the game has more replay value, is you could get to Sypha and say, or Sypha, I don't know which, no, I'm not taking her, and then go further and get Alucard and say, yeah, I'm taking Alucard with me. So that also makes the game. But I mean, the game also, again, it's got the incredible music. It's got really good graphics. I mean, everybody says this is the best Castlevania game on the NES, and 100% it is. But going back to the whole thing, sorry, I kind of started talking about it and quit. The chip, the VRC6 chip, in Japan, because the Famicom did allow for audio to come off the cartridge, you have the Famicom enhanced audio. So like the game just sounds like awesome. Because it's got like 3 more sound channels, and so you can have more like intricate, like a more intricate soundtrack, right? Because it's like there's more instruments that can be played. If you play this game on like an emulator or a Mister or the NT Mini or whatever, you can have the enhanced audio back. Or if you have an NES, you can. It's so funny. It's like you have to connect like one thing inside your NES, and you can restore cartridge audio, because then if you have like the EverDrive N8, or I don't know if it's only the Pro or if it's all EverDrive N8s, I don't remember, you can load up the Japanese version of the ROM, and you can have the Famicom enhanced audio. It just sounds really cool. There's nothing wrong with this version of it. Like when we were kids, we didn't know what we were missing out on. But like if you play the Japanese version and you hear the music that could potentially come out of an NES, then it's a little bit of a downer when you go back and play this one. But the only other thing I wanted to say about that, so this is the last game I have to talk about, and this game came out in September of 1990. And that's not to say I'm sure there are other great Konami games that came out later. I don't have any because I'm not as excited about having those. But to put things into perspective, to kind of bring things back to the Capcom versus Konami thing, when this game came out, Mega Man 3 hadn't even come out yet. So it's just, that's what I'm talking about, sort of the timeline of Konami games versus the timeline of Capcom games. That, we were only up to Mega Man 2, and then Konami dropped this. And then, Capcom kept releasing, great games like the whole rest of the... I know some people think like, oh, some of the later Mega Man games are not as great. And yeah, sure, compared to Mega Man 2 and 3, those games aren't as good. But when you think about the NES library as a whole, I mean, compared to other side-scrolling action games, all the Mega Man games are great. But, Capcom was doing a better job of bringing out great games on the NES later in its lifespan, whereas I think Konami was getting that job done, in the first half. Because like 1990, the NES had been out. It had been out for 5 years, but really, unless you lived in certain markets, it had only been out for 4 years. And the NES didn't get actually discontinued until like, gosh, what was it, like 95, 96, something like that, when they quit making the top loader. Anyway, so that's the 14 Konami games for the NES that I own. If you've got other Konami games for the NES that are sort of beloved for you, I would love to hear about them down in the comments, and I'm sure so would everybody else. So, yeah. So that's going to do it for this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.